Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with a little more common sense. Today we're diving back into the works of Bertrand Russell. This is In Praise of Idleness and Other Essays. We are up to Education and Discipline. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Exploring Ideologies, where we talk about exactly why these things are not intelligent. Let us dig in and continue our exploration of and praise of idleness with education and discipline. Any serious educational theory must consist of two parts: a conception of the ends of life and a science of psychological dynamics, an example of the laws of mental change. Two men who differ as to the ends of life cannot hope to agree about education. Now, I'm hoping that he elucidates what he means by a conception of the ends of life. Are you talking about the afterlife? Are you talking about spiritual matters? Because there should be a great deal of separation between actual regimented education, right? Spiritual education, which I deal with quite extensively, should be a personal endeavor and not the purview of the state at all. And so, I'm interested to see whether he's talking about that. And psychological dynamics, or the laws of mental change, that absolutely is intrinsic to education, right? The ability to understand, I was incorrect about this thing, let me adjust my understanding, is absolutely a part of education. So the educational machine throughout Western civilization is dominated by two ethical theories, that of Christianity and that of nationalism. Again, should be two separate things. These two, when taken seriously, are incompatible, as is becoming evident in Germany. Not incompatible, right? Incompatible means diametrically opposed, right? You can be nationalist and still follow the teachings of Christ. Not necessarily in the way that is understood by some of the denominations that follow the teachings of Christ, but definitely according to the greater understanding of what is going on there. Right now, I am not a Christian. If you are unaware, I have fallen away from that. That was the unconventional Bible study. I'll point up here because that's up there. It's 161 videos of me going through and adjusting my understanding of reality according to the things that I read in the book, right? The reading of the book, the unconventional Bible study, led me away from Christianity. These two, when taken seriously, are incompatible, as is becoming evident in Germany. Now, once again, this is around the time of World War II. Some of these essays are prior to World War II. Some of them are post-World War II. I'm not sure exactly which point in time this particular one is. The last couple have been after World War II, so this is probably during the restructuring of Germany. But becoming evident in Germany leads me to believe that the National Socialist Party, which was absolutely socialism, not fascism, socialism, was a complete misunderstanding of the application of Christianity and mixed in with some esoteric things. So, for my part, I hold that where they differ, Christianity is preferable, but where they agree, both are mistaken. The conception which I should substitute as the purpose of education is civilization, a term which, as I mean it, has a definition which is partly individual, partly social. It consists, in the individual, of both intellectual and moral qualities. Intellectually, a certain minimum of general knowledge, technical skill in one's own profession, and a habit of forming opinions on evidence. Morally, of impartiality, kindliness, and a modicum of self-control. You would be one to talk about that. I should add a quality which is neither moral nor intellectual, but perhaps physiological: zest and joy for life. In communities, civilization demands respect for law, justice, and between man and man, purposes not involving permanent injury to any section of the human race, and intelligent adaptation of means to ends. I am not completely opposed to this, right? This is fairly a minimum of general knowledge. I do believe that we should absolutely have a minimum of general knowledge, even though the United States Department of Education has failed miserably at enacting that, because governmental control of education is just as bad as governmental control of anything else. Technical skill in one's own profession. Again, I absolutely agree with that, and if you were unaware, our school system here in Livingston Parish, Walker in particular, in the state of Louisiana, is exceptional inside of our state, but even on a national level, because we do that, right? We have a couple of different tracks that you can take, which you can go to college, which was the driver for most people, but there are technical schools within our high schools here. And you can graduate from the high school here with a technical skill, which will allow you to go to work immediately, making more than many people. And so I absolutely agree with that. But that is only possible. Like, I live in the largest parish in the state of Louisiana. We have, I don't even know how many different school systems here, but this particular school system is locally driven. We have one that is parish-wide, but we have a great deal of autonomy within the schools. The school, individualized here, Walker, is the exception to Denham Springs, which is down the road this way, or Holden, which is down the road this way, or Live Oak, which is down the road that way. All of them have their own individual way of enacting their schools. And because we were able to not have the governmental interference in saying you have to learn this particular thing in this particular way, we have been able to become exceptional at it, showing that the individual local level is absolutely the way to go. A habit of forming opinions based upon evidence is absolutely something that I propose and I am a proponent of all the time. Morally, of impartiality, kindliness, and a modicum of self-control are all things that I speak about here regularly. The quality which is neither moral nor intellectual, but physiological: zest and joy for life. I have a whole video on that, the power of perspective and intention. It is the very first video in the Infinite Integrations playlist, because that right there makes more difference than all the rest of them put together. Civilization demands respect for law, justice, and between man and man, purposes not involving permanent injury to any section of the human race, and intelligent adaptation of means to ends. All of that I agree with. Now, we probably disagree as to the implementation thereof. If these are to be the purpose of education, it is a question for the science of psychology to consider what can be done towards realizing them, and, in particular, what degree of freedom is likely to prove most effective. Once again, I point back to what I just said, but on top of that, we're going to talk about the psychology for a bit, because I deal with that a good bit too. Also part of the Infinite Integrations playlist. I have reorganized the MBTI system, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, if you are unaware. And part of that has been this: understanding that people learn in different ways, and how you can individualize your particular learning patterns to be most beneficial to yourself. On the question of freedom in education, there are at present three main schools of thought, deriving partly from differences as to ends and partly from differences in psychological theory. There are those who say that children should be completely free, however bad they may be. I am not one of those. There are those who say they should be completely subject to authority, however good they may be. I am not one of those. And there are those who say that they should be free, but in spite of freedom, they should always be good. I'm not sure that your divisions there are quite right. This last party is larger. Like, they should be free, but they should always be good. You should always be striving for good. That is a thing, but nobody will always be good. That is an impossibility. This last party is larger than it has any logical right to be. Children, like adults, will not all be virtuous if they are all free. The belief that liberty will ensure moral perfection is a relic of Rousseauanism and would not survive a study of animals and babies. First off, holding animals to a moral scale is impossible. They operate by nature, and you are not going to tell a lion that it cannot kill something because it is immoral, right? You're not going to do that. It is not a possibility. If you try to change a lion to a vegan diet, you're just killing it slowly. And so, trying to project human qualities upon an animal or anthropomorphizing never works. It is not going to work, and it should not be used as an example of anything, right? Now, no one is going to have moral perfection. That is literally an imperfection or an impossibility, right? I don't care who you are, what you believe. You will be wrong at some point. And that being wrong can be a moral inconsistency. So, trying to say that anyone should be always good is an impossible goal to achieve. Not that you shouldn't necessarily aim for being the best that you can, but with the understanding that there will be failures. I do not agree with his divisions, right? Right. I cannot agree with this school, which seems to me too individualistic and unduly indifferent to the importance of knowledge. We live in communities which require cooperation, and it would be utopian to expect all the necessary cooperation to result from spontaneous impulse. Now, we have talked about the fact that also, just like there is no moral perfection, utopia is not a thing that even should be striven for, right? You should not be striving for perfection because it is through the struggles that we change, grow, and learn. The existence of a large population on a limited area is only possible owing to science and technique. That is true. Education must, therefore, handle the necessary minimum of these. The educators who allow the most freedom are men whose success depend upon a degree of benevolence, self-control, and trained intelligence, which can hardly be generated where every impulse is left unchecked. Their merits, therefore, are not likely to be perpetuated if their methods are undiluted. Education, viewed from a social standpoint, must be something more positive than a mere opportunity for growth. It must, of course, provide this, but it must also provide a mental and moral equipment which children cannot acquire entirely for themselves. There does need to be structure. There does need to be authority, right? But within that authority, we should allow a great deal of freedom, right? You should have the ability to investigate things that interest you. For example, if you are interested in a specific topic, you should be given the tools to help you succeed in investigating that specific topic, whether it be dinosaurs or planetary motion, whether it be basic physics or medicine. You should be given the tools, and the only way that you will be able to effectively use those tools is through structure and discipline. But you should have the freedom to explore. You should have the freedom to check alternate sources. You should have the freedom to experiment and to verify. Those are outside of the authority, right? There is still structure there. There are still rules that you have to play by. But authority does not necessarily mean authoritarianism, right? You can only study what I tell you you can, which is the case in most of our universities and especially in our primary education system. The arguments in favor of a great degree of freedom in education are derived not from man's natural goodness, but from the effects of authority, both on those who suffer it and on those who exercise it. Those who are subject to authority become either submissive or rebellious, and each attitude has its drawbacks. And again, this is not necessarily true. That would be a tendency, yes, granted. There are people that tend towards submissiveness, right? There are people who absolutely place too much value on what other people think. Again, see the MBTI. And there are people who completely disregard what other people think. Again, see the MBTI stuff. But there is growth within those, and there are a wide degree of people who can submit to authority and question it. So it is not necessarily one or the other. This is at best a fallacious argument, right? You are operating under the fallacy that it is either or, when it can be a combination of the two. The submissive lose initiative, both in thought and action. Moreover, the anger generated by the feeling of being thwarted tends to find an outlet in bullying those who are weaker. Would that be submissive if you are finding those weaker to... I'm just saying. That is why tyrannical institutions are self-perpetuating. What a man has suffered from his father, he inflicts upon his sons. Not necessarily. And the humiliations which he remembers having endured at his public school, he passes on to natives when he becomes an empire builder, because that is naturally the outflow, right? There's a lot of fallacies in Mr. Russell's arguments. Thus, the unduly authoritative education turns the pupils into timid tyrants, incapable of either claiming or tolerating originality in word or deed. Now, this is in large part true. If you have been around for any period of time, you have heard me complain about the peer review system. The peer review system is based upon a good idea, right? Various people take a look at this thing and see if it is true. They experiment to try to prove it. The problem with the system being the gatekeepers of who gets to be peer reviewed. If you have a theory, even if it is evidentially correct, and it goes against the current understanding, it is probably going to be dismissed, squashed, and thrown under the rug, right? That is the problem of having an authoritative system and being submissive. Now, it is entirely possible to circumvent that, right? Especially in this day and age. If you are unaware of the Thunderbolts project, I bring them up a lot. They are proponents of the electric universe. They are a resource that is linked on my page. If you go to my YouTube page, on the bottom there is recommended channels. The Thunderbolts project is in there. They have gone through the trouble of experimenting with plasma and have formulated a new understanding of where, why, and how the universe came to exist. Through science and experiments with no funny maths and the need to make up things like black holes and quantum entanglement, right? They have experimented and shown things that are not allowed to be peer-reviewed. Now, recently, they have made great strides in overcoming that particular hurdle, mainly because the information age that we live in, where information is freely available and you are able to go and investigate at your leisure a multitude of things. Now, most people choose not to investigate anything. If you're here, you're investigating something. There are a lot of things that you can investigate. By publicizing the investigations, you're bypassing the peer review. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have to be peer reviewed, but by bypassing and getting the idea out there, but despite the gatekeepers and authority, you are still able to get the idea to people who can bypass in different ways the peer review system. They may be the people who accept peer, right, or accept the papers for review. They might be the peers in question. And so now we have a way to bypass and insert originality in word and deed. that is not necessarily rebellious, right? That is these group of scientists discovering something, and while yes, they are rebelling against the authority, they are doing so within structure. They are doing so with authority in mind. They are trying to change the rules, and so that is in part rebellious, but they are trying to create the structure, and that is in part authoritarian. So once again, it is not exclusionary. It is something that needs to be taken as a whole. The effect upon the educators is even worse. They tend to become sadistic disciplinarians. His level of projection is just as good as his area of fallacy. Now, are there sadistic disciplinarians? Yeah. Have they been throughout history? Yeah. Look what they did to Copernicus. Look what they did to Kepler, right? There has been pushback to change. Some of that has been sadistic, absolutely. But it is not a natural outflow. It is an encouraged one in some cases, but it is not a natural outflow. Just because this does not mean that. A does not necessarily add up to C in this. Sadistic disciplinarians, glad to inspire terror and content to inspire nothing else. And again, that is true for some people, but not all. As these men represent knowledge, the pupils acquire a horror of knowledge, which among the English upper class is supposed to be part of human nature, but is really part of the well-grounded hatred of the authoritarian pedagogue. Now, we do have a severe problem with this, right? I talk often about how we idolize ignorance. If somebody is smart, we call them a nerd. If somebody is exceptional, we call them a do-good or a try-hard. We idolize ignorance. We idolize apathy. And we need to change that, right? But again, that is not a natural outflow of the education system. That's more got to do with your home life and the attitude of the people you surround yourself with. So, yeah. We definitely need to get over this horror of knowledge, though. Rebels, on the other hand, though they may be necessary, can hardly be just what exists. Moreover, there are many ways of rebelling, and only a small minority of these are wise. Galileo was a rebel and was wise. Believers in the flat earth theory are equally rebels, but are foolish. That's one of the few things he says that I absolutely agree with. There is great danger in the tendency to suppose that opposition to authority is essentially meritorious, and that unconventional opinions are bound to be correct. That is the truth, right? We have a very bad habit. We are told something that we find out is untrue, and therefore we assume that anything that is coming from that authority is going to be untrue. Having an incorrect understanding is not the same as being intentionally misleading, right? The people who propose the flat earth are intentionally misleading. They misconstrue data. They take things that have been, they will have an experiment, prove themselves wrong, and still justify it, right? But that is not, again, a natural outflow. You are not necessarily meritorious because you oppose the current understanding. And if the current understanding is wrong, we have an obligation to correct it. We don't have a supposition. We have an obligation. You should go with the correct information. But that information should be independently verifiable. It should be reproducible. No useful purpose is served by smashing lampposts or maintaining Shakespeare to be no poet. That, too, is another conspiracy theory, that Shakespeare never existed. If you're unaware of that rabbit hole, that's a fun one. Yet, this excessive rebelliousness is often the effect when too much authority has on spirited pupils. And when rebels become educators, they sometimes encourage defiance in their pupils, for whom at the same time they are trying to produce a perfect environment, although these two aims are scarcely compatible. What is wanted is neither submissiveness nor rebellion, but good nature and general friendliness, both to people and new ideas. That I agree with. These qualities are due in part to physical causes, to which old-fashioned educators paid too little attention, but they are due still more to freedom from the feeling of baffled impotence which arises when vital impulses are thwarted. If the young are to grow into friendly adults, it is necessary, in most cases, that they should feel their environment friendly. This requires that there should be a certain sympathy with the child's important desires, and not merely an attempt to use him for some abstract end, such as the glory of God or the greatness of one's country. And, in teaching, every attempt should be made to cause the pupil to feel that it is worth his while to know what is being taught, at least when this is true. How do you know when it's true or not? When the pupil cooperates willingly, he learns twice as fast and with half the fatigue. That is a large part of why we did the MBTI workaround. All these are valid reasons for a very great degree of freedom. It is easy, however, to carry the argument too far. It is not desirable that children, in avoiding the vices of the slave, should acquire those of the aristocrat. Consideration for others, not only in great matters but also in little, everyday things, is an essential element in civilization, without which social life would be intolerable. I am not thinking of mere forms of politeness such as saying please and thank you, but formal manners are most fully developed among barbarians and diminish with every advance in culture. I am thinking, rather, of willingness to take a fair share of necessary work, to be obliging in small ways that save trouble on the balance. Sanity itself is a form of politeness, and it is not desirable to give a child a sense of omnipotence, or a belief that adults exist only to minister to the pleasures of the young. And those who disapprove of the existence of the idle rich are hardly consistent if they bring up their children without any sense that work is necessary and without the habits that make continuous application possible. Now, I propose what I say is that you should take the hardest task upon yourself every time. You should be fighting for the hardest task. And so I do agree with that, right? So, yeah. There is another consideration to which some advocates of freedom attach too little importance. In a community of children which is left without adult interference, there is a tyranny of the stronger, which is likely to be far more brutal than most adult tyranny. That is true, to a certain degree. If two children of 2 or 3 years old are left to play together, they will, after a few fights, discover which is bound to be the victor, and the other will then become a slave. Where the number of children is larger, 1 or 2 will acquire complete mastery, and the others have far less liberty than they would have if the adults interfered to protect the weaker and less pugnacious. Consideration for others does not, with most children, arise spontaneously, but has to be taught, and can hardly be taught except by the exercise of authority. That is true. This is perhaps the most important argument against the abdication of the adults. I do not think that educators have yet solved the problem of combining the desirable forms of freedom with the necessary minimum of moral training. The right solution, it must be admitted, is often made impossible by parents before the child is brought to an enlightened school. Just as psychoanalysts, from their clinical experience, conclude that we are all mad, ain't that the truth? So the authorities in modern schools, from their contact with pupils whose parents have made them unmanageable, are disposed to conclude that all children are difficult and all parents utterly foolish. Children who have been driven wild by parental tyranny, which often takes the form of solicitous affection, may require a longer or shorter period of complete liberty before they can view any adult without suspicion. But children who have been sensibly handled at home can bear to be checked in minor ways, so long as they feel that they are being helped in the ways that they themselves regard as important. See example for that, my children. I have adult children and I have two really good ones, so I do not speak from complete ignorance upon parenting. I have children that are examples and not followers. And they are, yeah, we're not going to get into that, but I have great children. Like, I have the best two kids in the world. Adults who like children and are not reduced to the condition of nervous exhaustion by their company can achieve a great deal in the way of discipline without ceasing to be regarded with friendly feelings by their pupils. I think modern educational theorists are inclined to attach too much importance to the negative virtue of not interfering with children. See the Montessori schools, and too little to the positive merit of enjoying their company. If you have the sort of liking for children that many people have for horses or dogs, they will be apt to respond to your suggestions and to accept prohibitions, perhaps with some good-humored grumbling, but without resentment. Again, example of that. And not just my kids, other kids around me. It is no use to have and that's not to toot my horn, it is merely to provide an example. It is no use to have the sort of liking that consists in regarding them as a field for valuable social endeavor, or what amounts to the same thing, as an outlet for power impulses. No child will be grateful for an interest in him that springs from the thought that he will have a vote to be secured for your party, or a body to be sacrificed to king and country. The desirable sort of interest that it is that which consists in spontaneous pleasure in the presence of children, without any ulterior purpose. Teachers who have this quality will seldom need to interfere with children's freedom, but will be able to do so, when necessary, without causing psychological damage. Unfortunately, it is utterly impossible for overworked teachers to preserve an instinctive liking for children. That is not true. I know plenty of, I know teachers, right? I have one in the family, and they still like kids, right? Even the ones that have been doing this for 20 years and are fed up with the current generation of children still like kids in general. Even though this current generation, well, the current generation seems to be turning around, but the generation that just ended was absolutely wild and drove a lot of teachers away from the profession. They still like children. And so it is not impossible, right? They are bound to come to feel towards them as the proverbial confectioner's apprentice does towards macaroons. I do not think that education ought to be anyone's whole profession. It should be undertaken for at most 2 hours a day by people whose remaining hours are spent away from children. The society of the young is fatiguing, especially when strict discipline is avoided. Yeah. And children need to be corrected, right? There is a need for authority. There really is. But there is also a need for independent thought. It should not be excessive authoritarianism, but rather a structure by which to grow, like a trellis in a garden. Fatigue, in the end, produces irritation, which is likely to express itself somehow, whatever theories have the harassed teacher may have taught himself or herself to believe. The necessary friendliness cannot be preserved by self-control alone, but where it exists, it should be unnecessary to have rules in advance as to how naughty children are to be treated, since impulse is likely to lead to the right decision, and almost any decision will be right if the child feels that you like him. No rules, however wise, are a substitute for affection and tact. All right, so that is going to bring us to the end of what is this one called? Education and discipline. Both of those things are absolutely, well, hold on. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. Both education and discipline are absolutely a necessity for children. I mean, they're a necessity for adults. Why I'm doing here, and I'm assuming you're an adult because I don't get a whole lot of children over here. What we are doing is exploring education. This is not a formal setting whatsoever, right? We are merely talking about things that are brought to light by the various texts, and there's a bunch of them. We've talked about a lot of different topics. Understanding more is always better. Having a structure by which to do so is a good thing, but if the structure becomes limiting to growth or even to exploration, then we need to reassess the structure. Structure is good. We need structure. Tomatoes grow up a vine. Vines grow up trellises, right? We have structure for a reason. It gives us a definite shape to go in. There's a reason why we read these things, and I don't just randomly every day get on here with a different topic and talk about it. It is so that we have the structure of the various topics to bring to light the things to talk about, so that we can explore them, that we can discuss them. Now, I do not agree with a lot of Bertrand Russell's ideas, but I have the advantage of looking through history at the things that he thought that are absolutely provably untrue. We have discussed many of them as we have gone through this. The current education system is being revamped. We are in the process of something new coming about. It has been that way for at least a decade, right? Homeschooling has become more of a thing. Alternative education methods have become more of a thing. The current administration, the Trump administration, if you're watching this in the future, is restructuring how we do it, right? They are freeing up monies for homeschooling and school collectives, right? People coming together and deciding we're going to form this school to teach things that we believe. Or taking your money from this school to another school. But he's also doing what I am doing here on a better scale, right? I am here to investigate, to talk about, to clarify things that I know to be true and to speculate on things that I believe to be true. But there is a great drive, in part by President Trump, to have accessible information so that you don't have to go to a college to attain a technical degree. Is there going to be a certification process? Yes. Will you have to learn things? Yes. Will it be self-directed? Yes. Self-directed study is going to be more effective 90% of the time. The 10% where it is not is because you need the structure in order to learn. So if we can meld that together, where free instruction and structure come together to give you the best possible outcome, we will all be better off for it. Again, not to toot my own horn, but that's the reason why I did what I did with the MBTI system. The way that I learn and the way that you learn can be completely different. I've never been one to need to take notes. I can read something and comprehend it and be able to discuss it and discourse upon it and take whatever test you put. I've never been one to take notes, but some people need meticulous notes. They need the reaffirmment of writing it down. It reaffirms something in their mind. Some people are completely audible. They don't even need to read it. People have different methods by which they learn. That fundamental fact can change education all on its own. What I hope to do is I believe that these things are set about 7-8 years old. That the things that you focus on, right, the ideas or things, the new or the old, the tribe and the self, those things are set. But you can grow within those. If you are a things person, you can learn to pay more attention to the ideas. If you're an ideas person, you can learn to pay more attention to the things. That is true all the way through, but your main focus is always going to be the one. whether it's things or ideas, you will always default there. Learning how to do more is the point of the MBTI system and what I have done, right? To expand your understanding of what is. So definitely check that out if you were interested in education. If you have ever been like, why do I keep making these stupid decisions? It's because of your MBTI type. 99% of the time. It is something that can be corrected. Not necessarily changed, but corrected, right? You can grow, learn, and do more. If you are aware that there is a limitation, you can learn to overcome it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I discussed, leave it in the comments. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.